here today, and we're going to try to tame the flames of heartburn. But before we go there, I'm as you were doing the intro to the show, I was looking through some of the comments, and I just want to bring forward some of these things that were already being discussed in the chat box. So I encourage everyone who's here with us today live. The reason that you come live is you get to participate, and we get to communicate with one another, and that's kind of fun. So Joanna wrote, "This is my favorite half hour, anytime, anywhere." Boom. That's what we're trying to accomplish. That's pretty amazing. Emmanuel wrote, "I ordered Fiber Fueled a few days ago. Excited to read it. So thank you, Emmanuel, for your support." And then I want to bring forward this, because for people who are repeated viewers of the show, you perhaps have seen me here before. I come once a month, and greatly look forward to these conversations. But really, I just hope that they're helpful to you. And so Susie Q wrote that. Hold on, where she put it? Susie Q wrote that she's sitting in the choir seats today, and she's excited because kiwi did the trick. What she's referring to is that she was doing kiwi to treat her constipation.
Yes. Yeah, we were talking about that on the last episode, man, how powerful that little kiwi is and why you chose that for the cover of your book, man. That's awesome. So Susie Q, that's fantastic. I'm super pumped for you. So let's see if we can get some more help to some more people here today. Before we field the first question, I'm actually going to steal it. I'm going to take the first question today. How often do you have patients come into you and they say, "Hey, Dr. B, I've got heartburn that just won't quit"?
I mean, every single day that I'm in the clinic, Chuck. This is. You mentioned this in the intro, that about 1 in 3 people in the United States suffer with acid reflux or heartburn type symptoms, and this is exceedingly common. And I think that there are a number of reasons for that. Part of it is our current lifestyle. Part of it is the food that we're eating, and so I think it warrants a conversation about that, because I can tell you one thing, Chuck. The medications that are being used to treat acid reflux, things like proton pump inhibitors, look, I'm not here to vilify them today, but it is not a deficiency of proton pump inhibitors causing our epidemic of acid reflux. There's other things going on. And so if we want to understand the root of the problem, then we should unpack these issues a little bit and try to understand it better.
All right, well, let's see if we can't get some understanding here. Let's take our first question from Randy, wanting to know flat out, what is the best way to stop heartburn? I think she's looking for some food do's and don'ts here.
All right, so if we're talking about food, specifically with heartburn, there are the things that you can do in the short term to try to get better control of your symptoms. And then there are the things that are the sort of what I would describe as the long-term strategy. The long-term strategy that's really intended to correct the root of the issue. So with regard to things that we can do in the short term, there's a few things. One is to be cautious with the specific foods that you eat. That would include spicy foods, so like Mexican jalapenos. That would include acidic foods, so orange juice, tomato sauce. You want to be careful with fatty foods. Fatty foods actually slow the emptying of the stomach. So when you go high fat, like this is an argument in favor of being on a lower oil diet or no oil diet. When you go high fat, you actually increase the time that food spends in the stomach, and the more time that it spends in your stomach, the more likely it is to splash back upward. Another thing is timing. So we want to be careful about what time we're eating. So when we lay down flat at night to go to bed, gravity, which right now, me sitting upright, gravity is working in my favor, pulling things down. But the minute that I recline and I go flat, gravity is not working in my favor anymore. In fact, it may actually be working against me. And we want an empty stomach when we go to bed. So this is where we want to make sure we're having a nice early dinner, which frankly is the way that we're supposed to do it anyway. But nice early dinner, and then minimum of 3, but ideally 4 hours or more before you go to bed. I would be remiss, Chuck, if I did not also mention that alcohol consumption clearly predisposes to acid reflux. And this can be alcohol consumption at any time of day, but it's particularly problematic when people have that little late night drink. Maybe it's 1 or 2 glasses of red wine, and then you go to lay down, go to bed, and maybe the acid reflux doesn't wake you up that night. Maybe you you sweep through it, but then you wake up the next day and you're having worsening of your symptoms. And the reason that you're having worsening of the symptoms is because your esophagus was basically drowning in a pool of acid overnight as a result of the alcohol that you had right before bedtime.
So skip the beer, skip the wine, go for an herbal tea instead, perhaps?
Yeah, herbal tea is a good choice. A glass of water is a good choice. But clearly we don't want the alcohol. And ideally there's no alcohol at all during the day. But if you're going to do that, you know what, Chuck, I almost forgot to mention caffeine. Sorry, there's like so many things I'm going through my head. Caffeine also, by the way, like coffee, for example, can make acid reflux worse. It pains me to say that. Because if I were the patient, I would struggle with that. I know that.
No question. You and a lot of other people as well, man. Here's the question. I'm glad that Ellen is asking this one because this is one that my wife subscribes to or has subscribed to for years growing up. Ellen's question is, can milk help with heartburn? Her thinking here, Dr. B, is because milk or dairy is a base and she's trying to counteract that acid there. So what do we know about dairy and reflux?
Yeah, I mean, in the short term, if you're trying to neutralize, but there's other ways that you could do that. You know, you're not required to use milk to accomplish that. So, like, can milk in the short term make a person who's having heartburn feel a little bit better? Sure, it can. I mean, we have to be honest with regard to that. But there's better choices than that. And so, you know, I mean, Tums, for example, can do the same thing. And Tums actually has calcium in it, which many of us don't get enough of in our diet anyway. To be completely honest with you, Chuck, you could drink a glass of soy milk, and soy milk would accomplish the same goal as well. So I think that there's a number of different options that you could choose. Alka-Seltzer is another one. A number of different options that you can choose. You certainly shouldn't feel like you should be pursuing milk in the interest of treating your acid reflux. And, you know, I think the other thing, too, to bear in mind when it comes to this is, are we accepting short-term gain at the price of long-term loss? Because sometimes we do that with our dietary choices. So you may feel better in the short term with the dairy that you're consuming, but let's bear in mind that it's high in saturated fat. And, you know, I was just a moment ago talking about the problem with consuming fat is that it can affect your risk of acid reflux.
You mentioned soy milk here. Does that go for all plant milks that might be beneficial in that case?
The advantage of the soy milk is that it's more proteinaceous, it's higher in protein, and this is the reason why, like, for example, if you take a cup of coffee and you put soy milk into your coffee, it will cut the acid. And you notice that it actually works, whereas if you put almond milk into a cup of coffee, you don't really feel like there's a substantial difference in terms of the acidity of your coffee. And that's because the almond milk is so much thinner, less protein. So the point from my perspective is if the goal is to cut the acid, that's part of the reason why I would do the soy milk as opposed to the alternative choices.
All right, so a little bit later on this afternoon, I'm going to record the 300th episode, or close to the 300th episode of the podcast, and it's going to be the audio replay of this. And here's why I'm mentioning this, because in all of those episodes, never once has anybody ever used the word proteinaceous. And so therefore, my friend, you get those honors, and at the very least, we have the word of the day, proteinaceous. I love it.
There are many words that I prefer to proteinaceous, but, you know, living in the world of being plant-based and everyone assuming that I must be like a protein malnourished, starving vegan that can't possibly be fit and put on muscle, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not really too worried about protein. I'm not desperately seeking protein sources. I'm just quite simply eating plants. Plants contain protein.
I love it so much. If I could spell it, I'd change my Twitter handle to it. It's so good. Let's take a question here from Cheryl. Cheryl is wondering about chocolate. This is at 12:12. She's wondering about chocolate and whether that may contribute to heartburn in some cases.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. I feel so horrible because I feel like this is the world that I live in, having these conversations several times a day. Is I always feel like I'm taking away a person's fun, you know, because I love chocolate, I love coffee, but chocolate does also contain some caffeine, and that's part of the issue. Green tea, for example, green tea is an incredibly healthy drink, but green tea can also exacerbate heartburn symptoms, and so chocolate is another one that we need to add to the list.
And Tiff has a question here. What's the difference between heartburn and GERD? Is there a difference between the two, a distinction?
Heartburn is the symptom. So heartburn is the experience where you are describing what's happening here. GERD is more of an umbrella term describing the condition. It's a medical condition. So GERD is not a one-time event, right? GERD is something that you are dealing with on a chronic basis. Gastroesophageal reflux disease. And by the way, interesting point. In the U.S., we spell it GERD, G-E-R-D, E for esophagus. If you go over to the UK, they actually do GORD, G-O-R-D, because when they do esophagus, they place an O in front of esophagus. So, I don't know, GERD, GORD, whatever, but it can get a little confusing when you're reading research papers, because you will see them refer to GORD, and just to be clear for everyone, that's what they're referring to. Gastroesophageal reflux disease isn't just heartburn. I think it brings up an interesting point, a topic, or conversation for this, Chuck, which is, what are the manifestations of gastroesophageal reflux disease? And there can be a number of different manifestations. One of them is heartburn. So heartburn burning below the chest could be confused with chest pain related to your heart. You want to make sure the heart is safe first. That's one of the big medical concepts here. So you always want to get checked out if there's any question. But that's heartburn. You could also have a sour taste in the back of the throat. We call it a sour brash. You could have regurgitation. Regurgitation is where things come up, and you may feel them come up to your throat, and in some cases, in patients, they will have them actually come all the way into their mouth or out of their mouth, exploding out, almost like they're vomiting. Except that they're not vomiting, they're regurgitating. And the difference between regurgitation and vomiting is that vomiting is associated with nausea. You feel that nauseated feeling like, oh gosh, I feel queasy, I feel sick, and then it comes up, whereas regurgitation is it just comes up. There's no warning, there's no nausea, there's no other associated symptom, it's just stuff coming up. But there are other things that gastroesophageal reflux disease can be associated with. They can be associated with injury to the esophagus, which we describe as esophagitis. It can be associated with difficulty swallowing, strictures, that's scar tissue within the esophagus. Chronic gastroesophageal reflux disease can increase our risk of developing esophageal cancer, specifically a type of cancer called esophageal adenocarcinoma, which is rapidly rising. So since the 1970s, like literally 10 times more of these types of cancers than we used to see. And esophageal cancer is, before you develop esophageal cancer, you first have a condition called Barrett's esophagus. So Barrett's esophagus is a precancerous condition found in the esophagus that you really would not know that you have this unless you do an upper endoscopy and you take a look, and when you do it, you can see it very clearly during an upper endoscopy. Upper endoscopy, by the way, for those who aren't familiar, is a medical procedure that a gastroenterologist like myself, this is what I do, and my patient will be asleep, and I will run a tube that's about the size of my pinky, and it's got a light and a camera on the tip. I'll run that down into their esophagus, into their stomach, and take a look to see what's going on. In some cases, Chuck, gastroesophageal reflux disease can manifest with a cough, with a change in voice, with a feeling of fullness right here in the throat, with asthma or aspiration. So these are what we would describe as extraintestinal manifestations of acid reflux. So these are some of the things. If there's anything that I've forgotten, I'm sure there's something I've forgotten. You guys drop it in the comment box if there's something that you can think of. That's a manifestation of gastroesophageal reflux disease, and I'm going to be keeping my eye on it while Chuck continues to pepper me with questions.
It's them who's peppering you with questions. I'm just reading them, man. Shauna here at 1217. I get heartburn from tea. Is it the caffeine? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it can be. So even these healthy drinks, black tea and green tea, can cause heartburn symptoms. So just be conscious and aware of that. Generally, decaf teas, including particularly herbal teas. Herbal teas are kind of where it's at. That should be the go-to beverage if you have this issue. For many of us, Chuck, our morning coffee is really more of a ritual than we realize. So it's not so much the coffee, it's that we enjoy having that warm beverage every morning to kind of jumpstart our day. And when I've had a number of patients that I transition over to having an herbal tea in the morning, like it could be a ginger tea, fennel, chamomile. These are a number of options, and when they transition over, they find that they still have a great morning, still wake up perfectly well, and they feel much better.
That is interesting. The whole ritual thing, and not necessarily the caffeine or the fact that it's a cup of coffee. Maybe you just like to have a warm cup of something in your hand, and that just soothes the soul.
I think it really is actually a big part is just that, Chuck. And I've had patients who literally they just warm up some water, and like literally just warm water, nothing else in it, and they drink that, and they do well.
Go to town. Doesn't get much healthier than that. Wendell here is looking for some specifics here. Does apple cider vinegar and water help with heartburn? That's an interesting one. Vinegar with heartburn. You would think vinegar is kind of acidic.
Yeah, so this brings us into a bigger conversation, and this is a great question by Wendell, because there is a lot of discussion out there, and there are people who will recommend apple cider vinegar, and I'm gonna explain to you my thoughts on this and what I've experienced in my medical practice. So, because I'm very open to the possibility of something like this working. But, you know, of course, I'm also guided by science. I want there to be research to back it up. And if there's not research, then I want it to at least be very logical. So, I already mentioned earlier that acid can exacerbate heartburn or reflux issues. So I mentioned pasta sauce and orange juice. And apple cider vinegar obviously is acidic. It's a vinegar. So, you know, is this good? Is this bad? What's the deal? Well, I think, you know, let me step away from that question for a moment. We'll come back to it. But let's talk about what is the root cause of acid reflux. What's really going on here? And it used to be, back in the day, like when I was in medical school 20 years ago, that we thought acid reflux was an obesity issue. And that people were carrying excess weight around their waist, and that weight was actually applying pressure, increasing abdominal pressures, and driving stuff up into the chest. Like it was just squeezing your stomach, and by squeezing the stomach, you're pushing it up. That doesn't really seem to be true. We have so many people who are, you know, rail thin, and they have acid reflux or gastroesophageal reflux disease. So we knew that there was more to this, and we continued our investigation, and about 10 years ago, we came around to, it was actually some of my mentors in Chicago, Dr. John Pandolfino, Dr. Peter Karillis. They were sort of leading the charge to look at the effect of motility. Now, motility is a little bit hard to objectively measure, but what this is it's the way that our intestines are moving. So like right now, as we all sit here, myself, Chuck, all of you at home, our intestines are moving, literally right now. And what if the pattern of the intestines moving is problematic? And so they started to look at this, and what they found, Chuck, is that the esophagus would have these things taking place in people who have acid reflux called transient lower esophageal sphincter relaxations. And what would occur is that the bottom of the esophagus, which is a sphincter muscle, like it's like a ring muscle, it would just boom, open up, and then relax. It would just like boom, open up, and it would allow things to go up. And so this got us a little bit closer to explaining and understanding. But let's fast forward to today. Where are we in our understanding of acid reflux? New science is emerging as we speak regarding the power of the gut microbiome. And acid reflux is no exception. There are microbes in our esophagus, meaning that there is an esophageal microbiome. There are microbes in our stomach, not many because we have stomach acid, but there are. And what they have discovered is that people who have acid reflux have changes in their microbiome. So the microbes affect motility. The microbes, by the way, are also related to obesity. And it appears that the microbes may be related to developing acid reflux. And here's part of the reason why I think this makes complete sense, Chuck. In a randomized controlled trial where they took people with acid reflux and they gave them a fiber supplement, they saw improvement of their acid reflux symptoms. That makes no sense if it's just stomach acid. That makes no sense if this is motility. So what is the deal there? And the deal is that I think that the fiber is helping to correct the microbiome. So coming back to the apple cider vinegar, I know that we took a huge tangent there, but welcome back. We're talking about apple cider vinegar. That was Wendell's question. And thank you, Wendell. The answer to this, from my perspective, is this. There are no studies looking at apple cider vinegar in terms of stopping heartburn symptoms and making people feel better. There are studies with vinegar. Vinegar is produced by microbes. Vinegar is produced by microbes, all right? And when they create vinegar, they are doing this because it actually creates an environment that's friendly to microbes. So there's data, for example, that Michael Greger will talk about with the benefits of vinegar consumption, right? And I think that this is, again, related to the microbiome. So when you consume vinegar, there is the possibility that we could be improving the microbiome. But there is also the possibility that the acidity of the vinegar is actually going to exacerbate our issue. And what I've experienced, there was a period of time a few years ago where I was making the recommendation to people to try this because I wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to see if I could help people using vinegar. And the issue that I ran into is that many of my patients were seeing worsening of their symptoms. And then I would go to do the upper endoscopy that I was talking about a moment ago, and I would find objectively worsening of their acid reflux, meaning that there was increased damage to their esophagus caused by acid reflux when they were using the vinegar. So from my perspective, it's hard for me to come on board and recommend that people use apple cider vinegar. But that being said, if you were hypothetically my patient, and of course this is not medical advice, this is just me explaining things and educating. But if you were hypothetically my medical patient, and I was sitting in the office with you, and you say to me, Dr. B, I was having heartburn, and I started doing apple cider vinegar, and I am having no heartburn. None. My acid reflux is cured. I would say, cool, sounds good. Let's roll with it, and maybe we'll come off of it in a little bit, but for now, let's keep it going, because it's working. But if you were asking me, Dr. B, should I try apple cider vinegar? I would say, why don't we try fiber instead? Because we have this randomized controlled trial that showed that it works. And I don't have that with apple cider vinegar.
Always comes back to fiber. Always comes back to fiber. It is indeed.
I'm not trying to be biased here. It's just like there's just a ridiculous amount of research that people aren't talking about when it comes to dietary fiber or even fiber supplements. There's just a ridiculous amount of research showing how beneficial it is to us. And so every single conversation I can insert it because there's research for it.
It's just wild to me. It's just wild to me that a supplement would help in the way that you were describing. Let's see if we can take a question here from PMG. This was actually a holdover from the last show. What effects do antacids have on the gut? I think they're referring specifically here to gut microbiome and gut health overall.
Yeah, it depends on what antacids we're referring to. Are we referring to antacids that are neutralizing stomach acid like Tums or Maalox? Or are we referring to medications that are being used to reduce the production of stomach acid like H2 receptor antagonists or proton pump inhibitors? I view these as being along a spectrum in terms of the intensity of what you're doing to the environment. There is no question that we evolved to have stomach acid for a reason. It's there to help us with digestion. It's also there to help us sterilize our food. And when we remove stomach acid, there is the possibility that although it may improve our heartburn symptoms, it can have downstream negative consequences. There can be potentially a price to pay for that. And I think that one of the things that is clearly there, I mean, Chuck, with the proton pump inhibitors, these medications, it's a very hot topic whether or not they're good or bad. And people, like many things in our world these days, feel very passionately about their opinion. And that's okay. But at the end of the day, let's stick to the facts and try to find where the facts actually exist. And the fact is this. People who take these medications chronically, without question, are at increased risk of developing gastrointestinal infections. Specifically, an infection, Clostridium difficile. And this is a nasty bug, and the nasty bug, Clostridium difficile, only shows up when there has been damage to the microbiome. Like, the most common time to find this bug, C. diff, is after antibiotics, right? You destroy the microbiome, boom, there's the C. diff that takes over. But in this case, we're not talking about antibiotics, we're talking about the chronic use of proton pump inhibitors. And they increase your risk of developing this infection. So the point from my perspective is that although there are patients who do require these medications chronically, and I will recommend it to them, what we don't want is we don't want excessive chronic use if we can avoid it. And this is where, to me, the problem is not so much just the medication. The problem is the healthcare system in the way that we're using the medication, because we are not providing proper counseling to our patients to empower them with information about diet and lifestyle to get at the root cause of their problem. And as a result of that, they become dependent on the medicine, the proton pump inhibitor, when in fact we could reduce their dependence on the proton pump inhibitor and ideally get them off of the medicine altogether if we address the root of the problem.
You know,
mic drop, I'm out.
I know, dude. I mean, you're speaking my language here, and I think that you're speaking to a lot of people who are watching today. And I don't know if the experience was similar for the exam roomies who are tuning in today, but for me, it wasn't until I really stumbled down this rabbit hole doing the exam room that I truly understood that medication was used to treat the symptoms and not necessarily cure an illness. And so, especially these chronic diseases that people have. So I think that really it's incumbent upon doctors, it's incumbent upon the patients, it's incumbent upon everybody to really kind of open your eyes and kind of educate yourself to that fact. And honestly, Dr. B, I'm not sure what it's going to take to make that happen. It's a really, really arduous task. I think that we will get there eventually, but we really do have to rethink some things, man.
Yeah, I know. I think that part of the issue, Chuck, is that there is no financial gain really for anyone other than the patient who derives a health benefit. There is no financial gain from discussions about diet and lifestyle. That's the problem, right? Because a doctor doesn't get paid to have a 15 or 20-minute conversation with their patient about diet and lifestyle. And this creates an issue because the doctor can move on, like prescribe the medication, address the symptom, and move on and see another patient. And do the same thing again, and that's 2 patients in the time that it took to see one and provide them with proper counseling about diet and lifestyle. And you know, since we're on this topic, let's talk about this for a quick moment. I just mentioned the study looking at psyllium husk and taking a fiber supplement. Let me add 2 more studies to the mix, because look, if I'm going to complain about our healthcare system not providing education, then you know what? Let me just do it right now. You guys are here, let's talk about it. So, 2 additional studies that I want to mention. One, where they took a group of people who had acid reflux. This was actually an ear, nose, and throat study, and they put them on a plant-centered Mediterranean diet. So like very plant-heavy Mediterranean diet. And they saw that they improved their acid reflux. Now, is it the fiber? That's probably part of it, but there's a lot more to it as well. The point being, though, a plant-based diet, a plant-centered Mediterranean diet, improves acid reflux. And another study where they took people and they removed alcohol, removed caffeine, and replaced it with water. And if you have the audacity to make this move, you will improve your acid reflux, right? So more fiber, more plants, more water. It's very simple, and this is sort of the backbone of a lifestyle designed to enhance and improve acid reflux symptoms.
All right, let's see if we can grab a couple of questions here rapid fire before we wrap things up. I know you just said, get the caffeine out, get the, increase your water, get the alcohol out. But Cheryl at 1221 is wondering about decaf green tea. Is that in the safe zone?
Here's the beauty of this issue that I'm discussing. If you have symptoms, let's say that your symptom is heartburn. If you have symptoms, your body is giving you feedback immediately.
And cool down.
So let your body give you, listen to what your body is trying to tell you. If you have heartburn symptoms exacerbated by the consumption of green tea, then try decaf. And if you try decaf and you have no heartburn symptoms, boom, you win. But if you try decaf and you continue to have heartburn symptoms on decaf, then perhaps that is still causing problems, because caffeine is not the only thing in green tea. So there are other things that could potentially do it. The point being, whether it's green tea or coffee or chocolate or whatever it may be, any food, if you feel like it exacerbates your heartburn symptoms, see what happens if you reduce it or eliminate it, and allow your body to give you the feedback that you need to figure out what to do.
1230, this one from Amy. My worst heartburn comes when I eat something that is made from white flour. Why could that be?
That's interesting. That is not a classic food that causes heartburn, but I think if we go back to our understanding that I was speaking to a few moments ago, our understanding of the root cause